What's up, everyone? So as you can see, I'm still playing catch up after a couple of weeks during which I missed some of the new releases. So today we're talking about the Crow remake. Sorry, reimagining. I know a lot of people get upset when you say remake because technically this is an adaptation of a graphic novel and not a direct remake of the 1994 film starring Brandon Lee. But I don't really understand why people are so bothered by that or why they're offended by this film's existence in and of itself, because for one thing, they already made a couple of sequels to that 94 original. Granted, they weren't featuring the same character that Brandon Lee plays, but still the same story. And two, this is still following the same story as that 94 movie, so I think it qualifies as a remake, but call it what you want. The film stars Bill Skarsgård as Eric Draven. I actually don't know if they ever say his last name. He might just be Eric. But then we have FKA Twigs as Shelley and Danny Huston as our villain. After seeing this movie, I can't say that I totally agree with the label that cinephile culture has been giving it. People calling it the worst movie of the year feels like an exaggeration. Yes, it's bad, but not really in the way that I was expecting. From my point of view, there are only two reasons to ever do a remake. The first one is, let's say you have an original that's so bad, so why not take another stab at it because it's not like the original is very beloved. The second reason is that the original was great, but we have this new awesome idea about how to modernize the material and tell the story in a different way. To give due credit here, this version of The Crow does that second option. It is very different. We don't have any flashbacks this time. Instead, the first 40 minutes or so are dedicated to introducing us to Shelley and Eric as well as their relationship. It's much more violent and gritty. There's a higher focus on the supernatural, especially when it comes to Danny Huston's villain. I respect these changes. They give the film its own identity, even if that identity doesn't really work, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I actually found myself getting kind of sucked into this relationship. The characters fell kind of flat, but I like the whole idea of it not being centered around the characters themselves, but rather the love that they share between one another and what that love can drive one to do and literally bring them back from the dead. With that said, there's a fundamental problem with the setup of this movie. The actors might sell this relationship however oddly fast it develops. I think it's like over the course of a weekend in this version, but I didn't feel like I got to know the characters at all, especially Eric. Instead, we focus on Shelley in the first 40 minutes, and spoiler alert, she dies pretty fast in the story. That's a well-known fact about The Crow. So it felt weird to me that we don't focus on Eric at all. I mean, you get a couple of flashbacks to his childhood. I didn't think they really added much to the story, though. I genuinely wanted to get inside of his head and understand where he's coming from in the present time, and you never really get that. The dialogue is also pretty bad when they first meet in this rehab center. It just didn't feel believable to me that these two characters have a chance encounter and instantly lock eyes with each other and fall in love. It didn't feel organic whatsoever, even if the actors, again, did a fine job with the material. For instance, Eric asks, "Why did you love me so much when you first saw me?" And she goes, "You were so brilliantly broken." What does that mean? Explain it. Oh well, at least they give Shelley something. Eric, before he becomes the Crow, is just boring emo Bill Skarsgård. I don't like the look that they went with for this character. I, again, respect that they didn't try to straight up copy Brandon Lee, but if you're gonna do a remake, I think it's fair for me to at least compare it to that one and say that this version of the character is 10 times weaker, and I think the flashback format works much better at developing the relationship, and it also keeps the film more consistently paced. Also, even after Eric becomes the Crow in this version, there's a massive lull in the middle chunk before it turns into the schlocky revenge that most of us were probably hoping for. Sure, he does kill a couple of henchmen, but it's as if they saved all of the creative energy for the third act, which leaves this middle part feeling really saggy and dull. I actually did have a decent time with the third act, which is the last part of the movie that you watch, so maybe that's why I'm feeling like this is a little bit overhated, even if those first two acts suck. Some of the fight scenes were pretty cool. There's a sequence that takes place in an opera that genuinely had some pretty inventive kills and gruesome moments that once again set this apart from the 1994 version. It's in those few moments that you feel an actual wrath from Skarsgård. Another big problem here is exposition. When Eric first dies, he finds himself in this limbo state between life and death. There he meets a character who pops up every once in a while to give us exposition, some of which feels necessary and some of which feels like yeah, we don't really trust the audience to pick up the symbolism of the crows, so let's just spell it out in excruciating detail. And other than that opera scene, the film as a whole does lack style. I mean, go rewatch the original and tell me that the city of Detroit itself doesn't have a super distinct vibe to it that just makes the movie feel like a classic, even if it's not perfect. And as enjoyable as some of the revenge scenes are, there is a lot of noticeable CGI blood splatters that you can tell were digitally added after. And although Danny Huston does a decent job as the villain, you hardly see him until the third act, and he certainly doesn't have the presence of Michael Wincott's Top Dollar from the '94 original. But at least Danny Huston delivers an expectedly strong performance. That guy always brings his A game. Now I'm a little concerned that my praise for certain elements in this movie will be interpreted as me saying I like The Crow 2024. I didn't like this movie. In fact, it's actually pretty bad. But it's just impossible to not feel a little impressed when the overall reception to the film has been labeling it as the worst of the year and an absolute pile of dog shit. I think there are redeeming qualities here, but they certainly are few and far between in the overall grand picture, so I'm going to give The Crow 2 stars. So those are my thoughts on the remake / reimagining of The Crow. Be sure to let me know if you do see the film down in the comments, what you think of it. And if you genuinely hate this and think it's one of the worst of the year, tell me why. I'm just curious why you think there are no redeeming qualities here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.